Good evening to everyone. My name is Daniela Weiner. I'm an activist from GAVA. GAVA is a LGBTQIA plus network associated to Brasil-Israel Institute and to Aguda. Please follow us on Instagram and Facebook if you want to know more about us. We are organizing the Lesbian Visibility Week to celebrate the Lesbian Visibility Month. Tonight is the last night of our week with the event The Other War, the L Experience in Israel. I'm going to introduce our participants. Tamar Glezerman is a writer and director from Tel Aviv, living and working in Brooklyn. Her mid-length feature film, The Other War, got a lot of media attention for its straightforward take on lesbian lead characters and militarism. She has also shot Disregarding Gaza, a short documentary about how Gaza is approached in Israeli media. Her dark comedy short, Fill Your Hearts with French Fries, won Short of the Week's Comedy of the Year and has racked up over 1 million online views. She has directed the movie. She has directed the music video Don't Pull Away for J. Views Fit Right, featuring India Moore, as well as the social political short Division F and a campaign for Planned Parenthood starring Uniquely Cats, and animals content recently attached as producers on her TV pilot The Universe Doesn't Lie. She is currently repped by Writ Large. Tamar's work has been shown on the New York Times, NPR, MSNBC, Nowness, Refinery 29, NBC.com, Cool Hunting, Logo, and more. She has edited and consulted on films which played Sundance and Berlin, as well as for clients such as Bob Dylan and Disney. Marina Kostin-Fuser is a social scientist with a doctor on philosophy and gender studies and film studies by University of Sussex. Presently, she's a professor of contemporary feminist theory at PUC São Paulo, and she's also a teacher at the Cinema School of Yema in São Luís. Among her research, I would like to mention her study about women emancipation in Simone de Beauvoir, women in the political theater of Hilda Hilst, and nomadism in the cinema of Trinh T. Minh Ha. She is the author of the book Words Dancing on the Brink of the Abyss about Hilda Hilst, and she has co-edited the book Women Behind the Cameras, Brazilian Movie Makers from 1930 to 2018, with which she has contributed writing about the Brazilian lesbian cinema. She's also an editor in the Edição 24, a digital magazine about cognitive technology. So I really appreciate your presence. I'm going to leave the room now and have a good talk. So please, Marina.
Okay, good evening, everybody. So I'm speaking in English today. So I was very intrigued by your film, Tamar, the representation of a lesbian couple, which is not a romantic lesbian couple, the struggles of, I don't know, it showed me a very different side of Israel that I'm used to seeing in the screens, especially here in Brazil, like the way that Israel is represented is usually not as secular, and the conflicts of, I don't know, I found it very complex. I found it not the trivial lesbian film cliche that we look at screens. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So I would like to first ask you, the film it gives us a glimpse of a secular Israel that of the LGBTQ scene, which is not often shown here. It got my attention. Sorry, how the girls kiss and hold hands publicly without having to look over their shoulders. Due to homophobia here in Brazil under Bolsonaro and the situation, we do have to be careful depending where we are. Like, I can't just kiss my girlfriend wherever I want to. Depends where I'm based. Some areas in São Paulo are okay, some are not. So I would really be interested in understanding how freely can you openly be affectionate, like as a lesbian couple in Israel.
Well, I think that again, I want to preface by saying that I have not been living in Israel in the past decade, but I did spend the first 3 decades of my life there. I would say that for the most part in Tel Aviv, you can just be free to do whatever you want. But I don't really, unfortunately, I think that queer people, in a way, always look over their shoulders, even in a very, outside of actual pride or the Castro in San Francisco. For the most part, you do look over your shoulder, even here in Brooklyn, because stuff happens, and it happens in Tel Aviv as well. But all in all, I find it hard to answer for the entirety of Israel. I can answer much better about Tel Aviv. I would feel very free to do whatever I wanted in Tel Aviv. I wouldn't feel that way about Jerusalem. There are some neighborhoods that are more secular, some neighborhoods that are more religious, and that really weighs in a significant way. But having said that, I can say that I still got screamed at here in Brooklyn, which is very, very liberal, and in the University of Tel Aviv once, because it's just not the same as living your life as a straight person in public. But within that, I would say that Tel Aviv is very, very gay friendly.
This is very well. Thinking about the whole militarism, the war in the film that's happening, we keep thinking about, in one sense, there we could be critical of Israel in terms of geopolitics, and there's a lot of debate. There are a lot of debates, especially among progressive Jews, about Israel and Palestine and conflicts where Israel is not exactly like an example, a role model.
Not exactly.
Not exactly. Exactly. We were talking about colonialism and neo-colonialism. But at the same time, when we think about lesbian relations in that area, I don't understand where would we be free other than Israel. Like, I'm sure there are other places. I'm sure that this my view is very media oriented, but the fact that Israel is a place where, at least in Tel Aviv, which is the secular city, we would be free to have a gay pride parade or
Well, yeah, I can't really answer on behalf of other progressive cities in the area because really tragically, I lived in Israel my entire life, but I could never visit Beirut. Only here I have friends that are Lebanese and friends that are Egyptian, and they get to know more about the non-media covered elements of the Middle East. I didn't really have access to that living there. So while Tel Aviv is a progressive city and you can feel pretty safe, I also want to be very, very careful not to lend my name or my likeness to any kind of pinkwashing, because now that I am in touch with more activists on the Palestinian side or residents of East Jerusalem, and I can educate myself, and I hope everyone else is doing just that. Like Muhammad al-Kurd is the one that comes to mind, and Muna al-Kurd, his sister. There are a lot of leaders in Palestinian resistance that are queer and are out. And I just find it I want to be very, very careful not to use the oppression of other people, even by their own governments, to somehow say something about their rights. So obviously I'm not defending Hamas. Hamas is horrible, first and foremost, to the Gazan people. But at the same time, I don't want to be feeling too good about myself and how progressive I am as a Tel Avivian person with all the privileges. Especially when, with all the progressive, I mean, maybe comparatively progressive elements of Israel, Israel is not a country that has separation between church and state.
Mhm.
So you can't gay marriage, you can't even interfaith marriage, just to contextualize. So Tel Aviv and other places, I'm sure, that kind of build their own enclaves are still in stark opposition to a lot of other things that are happening in the country.
Wow.
So I don't know if that answered the question.
Yes, it does. It answers more than I expected, really. Uh, well, now speaking of your film, The Other War, the relationship between Ellie and Nama, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the names right.
You're good.
Okay, is not a romantic love story. So Elle is seeking for Nama's love, while Nama is constantly wanting to escape her problems. Her girlfriend can't sleep, so she asks to go out drinking instead of actually wanting to talk about it, as if that would magically solve the problem. Ellie didn't feel like drinking, so Nama went out by herself. It's like she wasn't supportive at all
Yeah.
of her peer. Staying at home and listening to Ellie was not even an option for her. What did you want to portray with this conflict of desire?
I mean, I think I was trying to portray a couple at the end of the relationship. So we kind of meet them definitely in the third act of the relationship, and quite certainly after a point where anything can be solved. And the movie is inherently very political in the sense that the personal is political, and also in the sense that they're living under the shadow of these wars that they don't choose, that change everything about the day-to-day reality. So my intention was to portray three women, one of them the sister, who is accepting of what it means to be Israeli. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have Naama, who doesn't want this, who just wants to live her life and doesn't want to accept these things. And then in the middle, we have the protagonist, Ali, who is pretty much torn between her commitments and her desires, and pretty much just stays put. So in many ways, she's a very passive protagonist. She's kind of reactive, which is probably not what screenwriting manuals suggest a protagonist would be, but I did want to address the reality of not just Israel, but of Tel Aviv, of living in this very crazy place with really unreasonable circumstances, and dreaming of the right to have a personal life that isn't affected by it.
Yes, definitely. I got the personal is political very much in watching the film. And the film is called The Other War in reference to the second war between Israel and Lebanon in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
If the war was if the war was a trigger to Naama taking her to Haifa to watch the sunrise over wine was possibly not such a good idea.
No.
And could you please elaborate on how the war impacted the protagonist's dramatic arc?
Well, basically, her sister is supposed to get married, and the husband is called off to reserve duty, and she finds herself a little bit filling in for him in support of her sister. And at the same time, her girlfriend is just wanting to leave, and it's kind of clear that the Ellie can't really do this because she has her commitments and her reality. and basically taking Naama to see these sculptures who, when we were shooting, I wanted her to take her to see something uglier than sculptures. I wanted like a power plant or something that which beauty is very much rooted in anti-beauty, and we ended up kind of splitting the difference and doing this outdoor sculpture park. It's kind of a Hail Mary where she's trying to show her like, look, we can have fun, we can be spontaneous, like just don't worry about it. Wake up there and have, and then it just really feels gross. Like who wants to have wine at 5 a.m. looking at Haifa, with all due respect, at like the port of Haifa is I love Haifa, but it's very, very polluted. So it's kind of far from having that, beautiful, picturesque view thing that you might be going for. And that to me is something that is very Israeli because it is such a small place. You always see everything. You kind of can't really get away from man-made things. Like the most, one of the nicest beaches in Tel Aviv, the one that has like pretty much the most expensive real estate, or at least was, is right at the foot of the power station. Like we went swimming there and we had the chimneys above us. So everything is kind of always the good and the bad, the ugly and the beautiful, the old and the new are always together. You can't really see one without the other, which is why I took her. I think that I wanted her to show her something that is kind of ugly beautiful, and it doesn't work. It's not supposed to work.
Yeah, I saw beautiful, I guess, because, well, coming from my perspective, that was beautiful. I love sculptures like that.
No, I
Like,
think the sculptures are pretty. I'm just saying
yeah,
we got, yeah, no disrespect to the sculptor, obviously.
uh-huh.
But it's not a tropical sunrise.
No, it wasn't. It
Yeah.
wasn't romantic.
Yeah.
It sounded like she wanted to be romantic
Hmm.
in a way, like with the wine and all.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like this film. The girl had already mentioned that she was triggered by the war. That the war. She wanted to escape the war. That
Yeah.
was so. Haifa was a city that was bombed
Yes.
during that war.
Yes. I think that at the time, um, I had wanted to like portray a little bit of Ellie's forced obliviousness, or kind of like that meme that's been really popular in the last few years where there's like a little dog and everything's on fire and the dog is saying this is fine.
Mhm.
So kind of that type of state of mind. Yeah.
All right. So in the meanwhile, there was an inner war. So because the film is about the other war. So not only with Ellie and her struggle for love, or to save her love, but her sister, who seems completely unhappy about her marriage. At least this is what I got from the film. The family here seems like a safe harbor to Ellie, like the relationship with the sister mostly, where both sisters seem supportive of each other, which is not always a tendency in queer families.
Hmm.
Usually, the family is where you're getting the most attack from, like the moment
Hmm.
you decide that you're breaking with tradition.
Yeah.
So I wanted you to talk about this a little, if you could.
Okay. So I've been very lucky in that aspect. So I think there are a few. It's not an autobiographical film, but it's not an autobiographical film either. My middle sister had gotten married, and then the war broke out. So for that was kind of the inspiration. But I specifically don't come from a traditional family at all. I come from a very secular, progressive, politically very left-wing family. So in my not to say that my parents were thrilled and super happy, but it wasn't, I was lucky enough not to go through what a lot of other queer people that we know have gone through conflictually. Like I heard some, sentences I could live without, but there was not really any kind of major conflict or rejection within my immediate family. So I think that for me, I tend to, maybe not in all the projects, but I think for me personally, my siblings, my sisters are the most, they're very, very close to me and a huge support in my life. So I think I just modeled that off after that. And again, like when you think about Tel Aviv, all the queer people come there because it's a safe space, either with their families or from their families. So I didn't feel the need to represent every type of gay experience. I just, picked the one, and I got lucky on that one.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was gonna ask you about your process of coming out. Like with your family, it seems like it wasn't so much of an issue.
It wasn't that much of an issue. I think that I had realized I was in the army, and I had realized somewhere in the middle of the army that I might be gay. Um, I spoke to my parents. It was fine, not amazing, but okay. I spoke to my sisters, who both basically said, like, no shit, like they knew. They were like, yeah, we knew that. Like, okay, thanks for telling me. So for me, it was a rather joyous kind of experience because I had realized that, because I used to have boyfriends and stuff and it never really worked out. And I thought, oh, maybe there's something wrong with me. And then I was like, oh no, like I'm completely fine. I was just like shopping the wrong aisle. So for me, it wasn't a very dramatic experience. Having said that, I do have friends who have been disowned, like even in Israel, or have a very bad relationship with their parents. With that, but I can't say that I have more Israeli friends that went through that than American friends that went through that. It just
Yeah,
really depends. At this point, I think I know more people that have kind of evangelical Christian parents that disowned them than I do Israeli.
yeah. My
But again,
girlfriend.
sorry.
Sorry, go for it. Keep at it.
Oh, I just said, but again, I come from a particular part of Israeli society, which is very progressive, secular Tel Aviv. I also didn't have to really rebel against my parents, politically speaking. We're in agreement. They had met in political activism in the 70s, so I'm second generation to having a pretty privileged outlook in that element.
So you never rebelled against your parents politically?
Not really.
No.
I mean, we can, at this point, we have some nuances and some little things. I think, politically, as far as it goes with the issue of Palestine, Israel, we're on the same page. And other things, we might have had different reckonings. There's also a very important reckoning of inner Jewish power dynamics between like Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews. And I feel like, in that sense, maybe my generation was more open-eyed to hearing the criticism and kind of having those discussions. But I think I've never found myself on the other, side of a great divide. And so for the most part, those conversations still are conversations that are relatively palatable to have. And, sometimes we can get a little heated and we're still Israelis, but no, I've been very lucky to not have Trump supporting parents and way.
Oh. My parents are in the left, but my parents, I rebelled against them for sure.
Yeah.
They were too authoritative. I wanted first I became a Trotskyist, and then I became an anarchist, and then
Yeah.
I realized I wasn't so different from them
Yeah.
as I thought I was. But all the values had to be questioned, every single one of them.
Yeah.
Although not, I have a brother who's a Trump supporter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he lives in the U.S. and he votes. He's a U.S. citizen. He has guns.
Oh, wow.
And the whole thing about being tolerant with him, I had to practice that because I love him and I didn't want to hate him. Like
Yeah.
it was. Everybody looks at me like, how are you so tolerant with your brother when he writes things on my page? And I go like, yeah. But my girlfriend did have to go through exactly what you were saying about the evangelical Christians. Her family is not exactly evangelical Christian, although they did vote for Bolsonaro.
Mm.
And her father, she lives with her parents. She doesn't live with me. She lives with her parents, and her father doesn't speak to her. It's been 4 years. She came
Oh,
out.
wow.
She came out
Sorry.
for our relationship before she had a relationship that was closeted. And I told her that I wouldn't be able to, I couldn't handle closeted relationship.
Good for you.
So yeah, and it's been a big struggle. Like she didn't leave to her family to live with me because she's been very cautious about
Mm-hmm.
losing her family. She doesn't want to lose her family.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. And in Brazil, it's like we say that, yes, in a way, before her, I had experienced homophobia in very rare situations. But since Bolsonaro came to power, we've been through situations that I haven't experienced before. Like
Wow.
people saying things to you, like now they have the courage to say what they're thinking.
Yeah. They've been galvanized.
But I think it's like in the US with Trump.
Yeah. There's like a heightened level of hate crimes. Yeah, obviously.
Okay, now
Yeah.
I did prepare a few other questions, but I'm gonna leave some room for us to just speak freely.
Mm-hmm.
But first, I'm interested in the ethnic composition of Israel,
Mm-hmm.
LGBTQ scene, like the Israeli scene, especially thinking about Tel Aviv, since
Mm-hmm.
that's your experience. Uh, is it mostly white? Are there Palestinians or people of other ethnicities? Social class, for example, is it like mostly white upper class?
And my experience is pretty mixed. I would say there are some Palestinians, but again, this is relevant. Like, I've only been visiting the past decade, and I'm sure things have changed and evolved. And I would like to just throw in a reminder of that. It's pretty mixed as far as Ashkenazi, Sephardic. A lot of people in my generation are mixed themselves.
Mhm.
And definitely the generation after me. And as far as Palestinians, either Palestinian citizens of Israel or Palestinians from the occupied territories or Gaza, they're not that many in the scene that I know. I know like a handful. Um, it's eluding me now, but there are a few documentary films about gay Palestinian citizens of Israel in Tel Aviv that I wish I Googled before this because I kind of forgot the name right now. That follows a few like nightlife characters, mostly gay men or maybe one or two women. I can say that would be generally, and then in the more activist, anarchist circles, it would be a little bit more mixed, and you'll have more Palestinian citizens of Israel, or Israeli Arabs, depending on people's self-definition. Obviously, can't speak for them. And then if you go back to the generation of like the men in the 70s, then that would be a lot of Ashkenazi. But that's kind of a closeted generation anyway at the time. But yeah, Tel Aviv is pretty mixed.
It's
as
pretty
far
mixed.
as yeah.
So also in the film, you showed them mostly in clubs when they're out of the house, when they're
Yeah.
not, they experience it, and I feel it like here in Sao Paulo, for example, we've got the ghetto area. We call it like the ghetto, like the LGBTQ scene, which is kind of like the Castro or whatever, like Williamsburg, the village.
Yeah.
So basically, the club scene is where most queer people meet. Is it still?
That was the scene I was part of when I made that. So again, yeah, then I'm sure it's still the case. I don't know about COVID right now, but there's like a very lively club scene in Tel Aviv, which, unpopular opinion, I think is so much better than the one in New York.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Good to know.
It is, because there's well, I don't want to criticize New York too much, but I feel like a lot of places you'd have DJs just playing their Spotify lists. And Tel Aviv, they're serious. They're beat matching. They know their craft. Not there are a lot of that here too, but it's not necessarily the standard in the same way. There's a very good club and nightlife scene, and it's kind of everyone knows everyone, and it's very fun. And for a few years, I was a part of like a large group of people who were constantly between those, those places, like my mid-20s. And so my partner was a DJ for many years, so that was a part of that as well. And it's a great scene. And I know that until today, like a lot of pink tourism is gay men going, for the clubbing, which is great. I think the entirety of Tel Aviv is pretty much like the gay ghetto. It doesn't really need to be one neighborhood or the other, but with urban sprawl / gentrification, obviously things have been moving out of the center to the south and to the outskirts, because people are being priced out, and it's kind of it's not the same as in the States, but still us, like millennials, don't have the same possibilities that our parents did as far as having property or upwards mobility in the same way. So the rents get higher, and the people who aren't working corporate jobs get pushed out. But that also affects, I'm sure, great new clubs and places and the culture. The like young queer culture, and also has its prices as far as talking about gentrification, like every big city can discuss.
Wow. Like I think about gentrification. I think of where you are right now. I wouldn't think.
Oh
of
yeah, I'm a prime example.
Yeah, because San Francisco, I've experienced something very similar.
Oh well, San Francisco is one of the craziest examples for sure. Like the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley for sure. But yeah, like I think a lot of people in Tel Aviv have moved to the south, Florentine and other neighborhoods. But again, this is almost a tourist's opinion, because
I'm sorry, I prepared the questions mostly thinking of Israel. But you could be free to actually elaborate and push it, take it to Brooklyn, to thinking about it.
I'm just saying there's some phenomena that are definitely not endemic to Tel Aviv, such as artists and young people being pushed out of the center. That's pretty much
Yes,
every big city.
gentrification.
Yeah.
For sure, we experience this as well here. And then again, what's the most where we've talked about the club scene, the cultural scene, but the political. What's the most sensitive demand today that you are aware of being in New York? Uh, where about the LGBTQ community in Israel? Like, what are the big flags?
Well,
That,
there's like a big legal fight about adoption, second parent adoption. That sadly I'm not really up to date on where it is right now. I have actually a few friends who are involved. Recently, like last month, they've extended the right to surrogate parenting to gay couples, which is a thing that gay men have been struggling for at least a decade. And again, that's also like ethically murky for other reasons because it's surrogacy in another country. But that's been at least extended to gay couples as to have the same rights as straight couples in that sense. I think the secondhand adoption is still a big thing. That is, again, I'm regret not Googling the latest on that before this meeting. I hope to see the different struggles become, continue to grow more and more intersectional. Because personally, I don't really believe that progress is possible in any other way. So there are, groups in the gay community. I was a part of a group that I don't know if is really active anymore. That was called Black Laundry, which is a play of words between black sheep and like doing your dirty laundry outside the house. In Hebrew, it's just a letter away. Which was a group that basically, reiterated that there's like no pride in occupation and so, and tried to kind of marry those two struggles. But of course, the gay community, the queer community is very far from being a monolith. And at this point, we have like a right-winged member of Knesset who's a gay man, Ochana, and he's terrible. He's terrible, but he's an out gay man. So I guess that's like a check in the good direction. But his politics they don't really seem like he is very concerned with equality generally, So I guess that would be a type of progress. But again, there are, as many places, there are big differences between gay and queer, necessarily, what that means politically.
yeah, I use it interchangeably.
Me too.
Thinking like this as a matter of saying.
No, yeah, me too. I'm just saying, like, the political struggles or campaigns that might concern you as a queer person are maybe not exactly the same ones that might concern you as somebody who just defines themselves as gay. As I think queer means a lot more politically, specifically intersectionality wise. I hope I answered the question, or I might have gone on a tangent.
Yes, for sure. I was gonna ask you about the parade because, of course, you haven't been. Maya and I have been to the parade for a decade or something, but
I haven't been recently, but
yeah, the Pride Parade here in São Paulo. It became around the towards the end of the 2000, the first decade of the 2000s. It became the number one. It has become like it competes with the Formula One.
oh wow.
and he has beat the Formula One. We were
Wow.
fastest. And it means more than 4 million people
Wow.
in the streets, like tourism, like pink tourism,
Mhm.
like something like unbelievable, like a lot of people, a lot of people. I can't go there anymore because it's too massive for me. Like
Wow.
they rob cell phones, and I mean you have to
Mm.
be really wild and crazy and happy to be in the middle of a crowd,
Yeah.
and I'm not anymore. Not at 40. On my 40s, I can't anymore. But I've lived my life very well. But it also became something very commercial, and in that sense, there's a class issue going at stake because it in the beginning used to be very political. You imagine all these people, like it started with the from the far left,
Mhm.
just a van full of
Yeah.
militants. And now it became something that there's so much money involved, there's so much power involved, but because of that, the politics is becoming empty.
Yeah.
Like it became a huge party,
Yeah.
and other than visibility, which is great, the Pride Parade will not give you much of a message unless you're actually involved, engaged in the cause.
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
of
there's
course.
a lot of criticism, especially from the left, saying like that it's lost its power. I
Mhm.
don't think it lost its power. I think there is still a power with visibility that we take for granted. But I
Especially
think,
with like the current president.
yeah,
Yeah.
we are in a culture war.
Yeah.
And it's weird that this guy was elected because of homophobia.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there are two things that elected this guy. One is the anti-PT Labor Party,
Yeah.
the scandals with the Labor Party. He manipulated, saying that he's the one who's going to fight corruption.
Mhm.
The second one was definitely homophobia. He kept saying that all his speech was very, very um, empowered by homophobia.
Oh yeah, that's terrible. Very outward spoken as well. Like there was no subtext there, if I remember correctly,
Mhm.
with Bolsonaro. Um, so are you asking about like kind of rainbow capitalism in Israel?
Yeah, exactly. That's a
Mm.
way of putting it. I like that.
That's not my term. That's
Yeah, I'm sure.
yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's probably kind of similar to what you're saying. Like visibility is still really important when, the ruling class or ruling elite allow themselves to say what they've been saying. And they say the same thing in Israel because you have every single one of the religious parties is blatantly homophobic and not trying to hide anything about it. And they have, I mean, not in this government for the first time ever, but usually they have completely disproportional power. And then you have people in this government. Um, I mean, this current government is very confusing because it's kind of a mishmash of things that probably don't really fit very well together. And on one hand, it's nice to finally not have Netanyahu. I I think Bennett is a horrific prime minister. So I don't really know. So I feel like probably Pride has its meaning in still showing like as long as gay queer people don't have the same rights as everyone else, visibility will remain an important issue within itself. Other than that, is it hollowed out of other meanings? I mean, I'm sure to an extent. I feel it, here in New York, it's gone so corporate that none of my friends ever go to Pride. We go to the Dyke March the day after, which is still
Yeah,
political.
we do that too.
Yeah.
Coming up with less because it's the
I'm
same.
not going to go and march with, a rainbow colored JP Morgan Chase Bank banner. Like, it's just, no. I think in Israel, again, I haven't been to Pride recently, and it used to be really, really fun when I was there. And visibility is important. I think the parade in Jerusalem is super important because it's such a right-winged religious city. We still have members of Knesset that say that the parade is like the parade of farm animals and like non-human things and stuff like that. So, as long as that kind of opinion is being espoused in national podium, then sure, we march. But sure, there's a lot of corporate in it. But I think that's kind of worldwide. It's like this Pride, I went just for my own entertainment, and I looked up all the big oil Twitter accounts, like straight up ExxonMobil and like BP and stuff like that, and also arms manufacturers, like Raytheon and Boeing. And I would say that at least half of them had rainbow colored logos on Twitter. So
That's funny.
yeah.
So my last question for you is about for you to elaborate a little on the LGBTQ or queer. Like I think I like the word queer in that sense, queer film tradition. Like, are there festivals? Are there like what's the
Yeah.
scene?
The scene is crazy bustling because I think there are like 17 like higher education film schools in Israel or something like that. The country is tiny. It's like a film school for every second person. And when I came out with Other War in 2008, that was the longest like lesbian film to have made until that point. But since then, there have been at least 10 features that some of them are great. So the two things I recommend, one is a festival that I was actually one of the Other War actually was the inaugural night of that festival, which has been running for 12 years since. It started by a friend of mine. We kind of like started over coffee and became a yearly thing, which is why it has a very ridiculous name, because we were just a group of friends starting the first one. And my best friend, we were looking for a name, and he just came up with like a really tacky sequel name. So the first event was called Lethal Lesbian 3.
Lethal lesbian?
3. That was the first one. Ever, ever since, it's just called Lethal Lesbian, and it's very tacky and B movie, but none of us thought it would become a thing. We were just like, the first event was crazy. It was an art show and a film show and all that. And then when I showed like a short there a few years ago, it was already in like the Cinematheque, largest audience, largest room, like 4 screenings in a row or something. So it got pretty big. And that's a yearly event of just lesbian film and culture. And it's usually a bunch of shorts and 1 or 2 features. And it's run by dear friends of mine, who I'm sure never thought it would get this far, but it kind of grew because as we actually, through the first event, it was pretty clear that there's such a hunger for that because it was sold out and there were 1,000 people on the first night. So we were like, oh, okay. And it was started out by these 2 women who have, they're not doing nightlife anymore. One's in like politics, the other, I guess she's doing nightlife, who were like the queens of the lesbian nightlife scene at the time. So Lethal Lesbian is pretty cool. And then you have TLV Fest, which is a LGBTQA plus festival that's been running for at least 15 years. And that's a yearly thing as well. So there's a lot of good content there. And then there are like full features coming out all the time, and a lot of interesting, the culture coming out is great. It's honestly, even outside of LGBTQ stuff, like the amount of Israeli shows that are made into American shows is insane. So yes, definitely a lot of interesting cultural stuff happening in these two places, and I'm sure a lot of other ones. Like you can also find a lot of Israeli content on Netflix at this point, or maybe it just shows it to me. But I think there's a lot.
I think here we had access to Shizo. We had access to just most to the most famous ones that are.
Yeah, well, Stissel's pretty good. I like that.
Yeah. I wrote a review on Shtizo, which is about to be published.
Oh, cool.
With a
Did you like it?
Rabbi. I loved it. I loved it. It was at first it looked like too much of like too dramatic, like a soap.
Yeah.
At the beginning, it was hard to like engage, but then suddenly Akiva, he's just he's fabulous.
No, I really like that show. It's also like the first time, maybe because there's it has a lot to do with being LGBT. There's not a lot of love lost between secular Israelis and the Orthodox community in Israel. Those communities are very segregated from each other, with one of them having so much power over the other, and little communication and very few shared values. Specifically now with like COVID, it's been pretty difficult because the very different vaccination and masking norms between the communities, and obviously it doesn't stay in the community. But so I feel as an Israeli that Shtisel actually helped me to kind of humanize these people who I have been at odds with in the public space, both politically, primarily as a woman, even before being gay.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely with all three kind of identities. So I thought Shtisel was really good and important, because at the end of the day, you can have a lot of criticism, but you definitely are not trying to keep other groups dehumanized in your eyes. So anything that helps. And I thought that show was really effective in just showing humanity and just the everyday struggles.
It showed them as real, like not as the robot that they might seem to people who are outside.
Exactly. Yeah. But and I had made a movie about the Orthodox community here, a short movie a couple of years ago, that I didn't write, that I was hired to direct, and I kind of got like a peek into the Satmar life in South Williamsburg. So I was kind of already in the process of trying to like open up this like weird relationship and re-examine it from here. But I think Shtisel did a really good job.
Wow, I'm really looking forward to watching more of your films.
Oh, thank you. They're just all on YouTube and stuff like that. I don't have any paywalls or anything like that about anything. So
yes, I will definitely be watching more of your films and seeing. I would love to see this one. With the whole film, with the whole thing of Shtizo, my concern was about Ruhama.
Mm-hmm.
First, because she's a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
And that made me feel very uncomfortable, seeing her worry about her 14-year-old boy not caring more about studying than about taking care of her, when he's not supposed to be mature enough to be a husband.
Yeah. I think they get married when they're 17 or something, right? In the show.
Yeah. but they're still so young. And
Yeah.
also Ruhama, she starts with as a girl who would steal books, not steal, borrow books that were
Yeah.
inappropriate for her, and all of them with like the Middle March, like feminist books.
Yeah.
And I was expecting her to be the one who was gonna rebel against oppression, and she became exactly a person who wanted to actually enforce tradition.
Well, she does that in a different show, same actress. And Unorthodox, right?
Yeah.
A crossover.
Yes. Yes, same actress. I didn't notice that. And then Unorthodox, I thought that was a problematic depiction of the family, the Orthodox family. Like they seemed like no one was slightly empathetic.
Yeah.
Like in the family, like the people that come after her, like her husband being like just this guy who totally dependent on his mother.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I thought that at the same time as I love that show, Unorthodox, and I love the ending especially, but I did feel like maybe this is gonna be taken out of hand. It's gonna be interpreted. It leaves room for a very negative interpretation of the Jewish community, especially for people who can't really make.
Yeah. Well, that's always the issue when you're depicting anyone, basically anyone, and you want to tell a story, because the truth is that reality demands much less of three-dimensional characters than art does. So when you're writing a script, you have to make sure that the villain isn't too villainous and like everything is kind of like not flat. But when you're reading the news, you oftentimes don't really find that three-dimensional in the bad guys. That's kind of a constant tension. I feel like for me, working here under the last like Trump-Pence regime, every day I was like, how am I supposed to be writing complex characters when reality is becoming more and more like a Disney film every day? So I don't know. I mean, I read the book, not Unorthodox. It seemed pretty true to the book, but again, when you depict someone who's Orthodox or who's gay or who's whatever ethnicity, and they're very problematic, you're always like, oh, I hope this doesn't fall into the wrong hands and is kind of like taken as fodder. But what's my alternative? Am I supposed to just have like good, perfect people if they're any kind of minority and like make more boring art? So it's kind of a question, right?
I agree with you. I do think that we can't be prisoners of stereotypes. I think that our time is up, so they're asking us to leave.
Okay.
So I'm gonna thank you so much. This was I learned so much today, and
thank you for a really interesting discussion and sharing a bit about your own experiences.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
And I'll look up on YouTube when it's on it.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone who's watching.
Thank you.
Hopefully someone is. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.